The neighborhood had been designed to project perfection. Manicured lawns rolled in gentle, identical waves. Mailboxes stood at matching angles. Driveways were empty except for approved vehicles that fit a narrow definition of acceptable success. Everything about the street was meant to communicate order, control, and the quiet authority of an HOA that believed itself untouchable. Into this environment sat a car that did not belong, at least not by appearances. It rested in a private driveway at the edge of the block, a low, wide-bodied vehicle dulled by age, its paint oxidized to a matte finish that suggested neglect rather than intention. The chrome was muted, the tires thick and old-fashioned, and the silhouette unfamiliar to anyone who only understood cars through modern badges and glossy commercials. To passing eyes, it looked like something forgotten, something dragged out of a barn and left to decay under suburban skies. The homeowner never hurried when he parked it. He never covered it. He never explained it. The car simply existed, immovable and unbothered, like a quiet challenge to the neighborhood's obsession with appearances. At first, the HOA merely watched. Emails circulated internally, notes were taken, photos were snapped from a distance and uploaded into shared folders labeled with words like violation, unsightly, and non-compliant. The car offended not because it broke any written rule, but because it disrupted the visual uniformity the association prized above all else. To the HOA board, the vehicle was not transportation or history or property, it was a symbol of defiance. The homeowner himself was just as unsettling. He did not attend HOA meetings, he did not submit landscaping plans. He paid no dues. His house, though well-maintained, did not mirror the identical designs that filled the rest of the street. It sat on a slightly raised plot, older than the surrounding development, with mature trees that predated the subdivision itself. He kept to himself. He spoke politely when approached, but never volunteered information. He had moved in quietly, without ceremony, years earlier, long before the current board members had risen to power. To them, he was an unknown variable, and unknowns made the HOA nervous. The first notice arrived without fanfare. It cited aesthetic standards, it referenced community values, it warned that the abandoned or inoperable vehicle visible from the street violated neighborhood guidelines. It demanded removal within a fixed number of days to avoid fines. The homeowner read it, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. Nothing changed. The car remained where it was, catching sunlight on its curves, collecting dust with patience that suggested it had waited far longer for worse things than an HOA letter. The second notice arrived sharper, more aggressive in tone. It escalated language. It threatened enforcement. It included a grainy photo taken from across the street, the car framed like evidence in a criminal case. Again, the homeowner did nothing. This silence infuriated the board. The HOA had grown accustomed to instant compliance. Residents usually scrambled to repaint fences, trim hedges, or move trash cans within hours of receiving warnings. Authority worked because people believed in it, or feared it. Here, neither response appeared. Behind closed doors, the board decided to make an example. They logged the property into their enforcement system as non-cooperative. They approved fines. They scheduled inspections. They spoke of towing companies and legal action, confident that pressure would break resistance as it always had before. What they did not do was check land records. What they did not do was research the car itself. To them, age equaled worthlessness, rust equaled junk, silence equaled guilt. The homeowner watched the escalation calmly. He had seen power structures behave this way before, loud, confident, and careless, mistaking repetition for legitimacy. He knew how institutions leaned on intimidation when they lacked true authority. The car was not junk. It was a rare, hand-built classic from a defunct manufacturer, produced in limited numbers decades earlier, prized by collectors who understood its engineering, its provenance, and its survival. Underneath the weathered exterior lay a meticulously preserved frame, original components, and a documented history that traced back to private collections and closed auctions. The car did not shine because it did not need to. Its value was not aesthetic, it was historical. $2 million conservatively. The homeowner had restored nothing because nothing needed restoring. The patina was intentional, protected, authenticated. Experts would have recognized it instantly. The HOA did not employ experts. As weeks passed, enforcement vehicles began to idle near the property. Clipboards appeared. Notes were placed on windshields. The board members felt emboldened, interpreting the homeowner's lack of response as weakness. They began to talk openly about towing. They discussed liens. They believed they were in control. What they still did not understand was that the street itself rested on land they did not own. Decades before the development existed, before the HOA was even an idea, the homeowner's family had acquired the original tract. When the subdivision was built, parcels were sold, but not all rights were surrendered. Easements were granted, roads were leased. Certain sections of land remained under a private holding structure that most residents had never noticed because it had never mattered, until now. The homeowner was not just a resident, he was the landlord beneath the pavement. Every driveway, every sidewalk, every manicured lawn existed atop agreements, signed long before the HOA began acting like a governing body. The association managed appearances, not ownership. They enforced guidelines, not laws. They had authority only because no one had challenged it. The car was the catalyst. By targeting it, the HOA had unknowingly pushed against something far older and far more substantial than their bylaws. As another notice was issued, this one threatening immediate action, the homeowner finally prepared to respond, not with words, but with documents. He gathered records that traced land ownership back generations. He compiled appraisals, auction references, and insurance valuations for the car. He printed plats, easements, and contracts that showed exactly where HOA authority ended. He did not rush. He knew the timing mattered. The HOA, meanwhile, scheduled enforcement. They believed the next step would be decisive, that the spectacle of power would force submission. They expected an apology, compliance, perhaps quiet resentment that would fade into routine obedience. They did not expect revelation. As the sun set over the uniform rooftops and the car remained unmoved, the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just arrogance but ignorance, one rooted in assumptions about value, ownership, and who truly controlled the neighborhood. The silence before that reckoning was heavy, and it would not last much longer. The HOA mistook preparation for hesitation. From their perspective, the homeowners' continued silence confirmed their assumptions. The car still sat unmoved. No formal appeal had been filed, no apology had been offered, no attempt had been made to work with the board. To them, it looked like fear disguised as stubbornness. That belief fueled their confidence. The enforcement process accelerated quietly but aggressively. Internal emails hardened in tone. The car was now labeled an eyesore risk. The property itself was flagged as hostile to community standards. The homeowner's name began appearing repeatedly in meeting notes, always attached to words like defiance and non-compliance. The HOA chair viewed the situation as a test of authority. In neighborhoods like this, power depended on momentum. Once residents sensed hesitation, others followed. The board believed that allowing one car, especially one so visibly out of place, to remain would invite chaos. Today it was a rusted vehicle. Tomorrow it might be overgrown lawns, unapproved paint colors, or refusal to pay dues. Order had to be enforced decisively. They authorized fines retroactively, stacking penalties day by day. They initiated the first steps toward a lien, confident the homeowner would fold long before paperwork became public. They contacted a towing contractor known for aggressive removals, asking preliminary questions under the guise of potential future enforcement. None of them questioned whether the HOA actually had the right to do any of this. On the surface, the neighborhood continued its polished routine. Joggers passed the driveway without slowing. Children biked past without noticing the quiet tension building behind closed doors. Neighbors whispered occasionally, pointing subtly at the car, speculating about how long the HOA would tolerate it. The narrative had already been written in their minds. The homeowner was the problem. What no one realized was that the homeowner was already several steps ahead. While the HOA escalated emotionally, he escalated strategically. He reviewed documents that hadn't been touched in years. He cross-referenced county records, development plans, and municipal approvals. He revisited contracts signed when the subdivision was first proposed, long before most residents had purchased their homes. The deeper he went, the clearer the picture became. The HOA's authority was narrow. It had been granted power to manage appearances and shared amenities, nothing more. Roads, utility easements, and significant portions of the underlying land were governed by long-term private agreements that predated the association itself. Those agreements were still valid. The homeowner was the managing beneficiary of the holding entity named in those documents. The HOA did not own the street. They managed it at his discretion. At the same time, he had the car independently reappraised by a specialist who rarely worked outside elite collector circles. The report was exhaustive. Serial numbers, manufacturing anomalies, original components, historical transfers, auction comparables, every detail was verified and certified. The number at the bottom of the report was deliberately conservative. $2 million. Insured. Documented. Undeniable. The homeowner understood something the HOA did not. Authority collapses fastest when it is exposed publicly with evidence. Loud arguments could be ignored. Legal facts could not. He waited. The HOA, growing impatient, sent a final enforcement notice. It was delivered with official formatting, legal-sounding language, and a deadline that implied inevitability. It warned of towing, escalating fines, and further action if compliance was not immediate. To the board, this was the final push. They expected panic. Instead, they received silence. Behind that silence, preparations were complete. The homeowner assembled a clean, organized file. No theatrics, no emotion, just facts. He scheduled a response, not to argue, but to inform, not to plead, but to reveal. The timing was intentional. The HOA had planned a routine board meeting later that week, expecting nothing more than updates and rubber-stamped decisions. The towing discussion was slotted casually, already assumed resolved. That meeting would not go as planned. In the days leading up to it, rumors spread. A few neighbors noticed official-looking vehicles parked briefly near the homeowner's property. Others saw survey markers placed discreetly along the street, mistaken for utility work. The HOA ignored the signs. They had grown comfortable in their dominance. For years, no one had challenged them with anything more than angry emails or hollow threats of lawyers who never materialized. They believed this situation was no different. They believed the car was junk. They believed the homeowner was bluffing. They believed ownership was simple. If it looked like theirs, it must be. They were wrong on every count. When the homeowner finally broke his silence, it was not with confrontation, but with compliance of a very specific kind. He acknowledged receipt of the HOA's notices. He confirmed understanding of their claims. Then he attached documents. Dozens of pages followed. Land deeds, easement agreements, development contracts, county certifications, insurance appraisals, market valuations, historical records. Each document was labeled, indexed, and referenced to specific claims made by the HOA in their notices. Every assumption was countered with evidence. Every assertion was matched with a statute or contract clause. There was no anger in the submission, only clarity. The HOA received it hours before their scheduled meeting. Board members opened the email casually, expecting excuses or partial compliance. What they found instead forced them to read more carefully, then to reread, then to question their understanding. The words ownership and authority appeared repeatedly, but not in ways they had anticipated. The car was not abandoned. It was not inoperable. It was not junk. It was a historically significant, fully insured collectible worth more than several homes on the block combined. And the driveway it sat on was not subject to HOA enforcement in the way they believed. Neither was the road beside it. The implications began to sink in slowly, uncomfortably. If the documents were accurate and initial checks suggested they were, then the HOA's enforcement actions were not just misguided, they were unauthorized, potentially unlawful. The meeting that evening was tense. The towing discussion was removed from the agenda. Questions replaced confidence. Legal exposure was mentioned quietly. For the first time since the car appeared, the HOA was no longer certain who held power. The homeowner did not attend the meeting. He did not need to. His presence was already felt. The car still sat in the driveway, unchanged, indifferent to the sudden shift in tone. What had once been a symbol of defiance was now something else entirely, a marker of how fragile assumed authority could be when confronted with truth. The HOA had pushed too far, too fast, without understanding the ground beneath them. And the ground, it turned out, did not belong to them at all. The HOA entered damage control mode before it admitted anything had gone wrong. What had once been a routine enforcement issue was now a legal uncertainty spreading through every level of the association. Board members, who had spoken confidently only days earlier, now weighed every sentence, aware that each written word could later be examined by attorneys. The tone of internal communications shifted from aggressive to cautious, from commanding to procedural. The documents submitted by the homeowner could not be dismissed. They were authentic, verified, filed with the county long before the HOA existed. The more the board reviewed them, the more uncomfortable the situation became. Authority that had once felt absolute now appeared conditional, fragile, even borrowed. The realization unsettled them deeply. The car was no longer the primary concern. It had become a symbol of their overreach, a visible reminder of how easily assumptions could unravel. Yet, backing down openly felt impossible. The HOA had built its reputation on dominance. Publicly admitting error risked undermining years of carefully maintained control. So they tried another approach. Instead of enforcing, they delayed. Notices stopped. Fines were quietly paused. The towing contractor was told to stand down, pending review. No explanation was given to residents. The hope was that silence would allow the issue to fade without confrontation. But silence no longer worked. Neighbors had begun asking questions. Why had enforcement suddenly stopped? Why were survey markers still visible along the street? Why had an insurance adjuster been seen photographing the car? Why did county vehicles appear briefly and then vanish? Whispers turned into speculation. Some residents assumed the homeowner had powerful legal backing. Others suspected a settlement. A few, more observant than the rest, began searching public records themselves. What they found confirmed the truth faster than the HOA could contain it. Property plats revealed unusual boundaries. Deeds referenced entities unfamiliar to most homeowners. Road ownership was listed under a private holding trust, not the association. Easement agreements granted usage, not control. The story spreading through the neighborhood shifted dramatically. The man with the junk car was no longer viewed as careless or defiant. He was something else entirely, quiet, informed, and deeply entrenched in the legal foundation of the neighborhood itself. The HOA's authority began to feel performative. Inside the board, frustration replaced confidence. Some members argued for full retreat, urging acknowledgement of error before exposure worsened. Others insisted on asserting dominance, believing the homeowner's restraint was a bluff designed to scare them into submission. Those voices pushed for a test. They proposed a limited enforcement action, small, symbolic, designed to reassert control without escalating too far. A minor fine, a warning notice, something to remind residents that the HOA still governed the community. Against legal advice, they approved it. The notice was delivered carefully, stripped of threatening language, framed as a clarification request. It referenced appearance standards without mentioning towing or penalties. To the board, it felt safe. To the homeowner, it confirmed what he already knew. They had not learned. He responded the same way he had before, with documentation. This time he expanded the scope. He submitted not only ownership records, but correspondence from the county acknowledging the unique governance structure of the street. He included legal opinions outlining the limits of HOA authority over privately held roads. He referenced statutes the board had never considered, because they had never needed to. He did not threaten, he informed. The response was final, precise, and impossible to ignore. It also included a notice of potential liability. The HOA had now been warned. That warning triggered fear. Board members began resigning quietly, citing personal reasons. Others distanced themselves from prior decisions, claiming they had been misled or overruled. The unity that had once made the HOA formidable fractured under scrutiny. Residents noticed. Meetings grew sparsely attended. Agendas shrank. Decisions were deferred. Confidence evaporated. The car remained unmoved. By now, it had become something of a landmark. People slowed as they passed, no longer judging but curious. Some researched its make and history, surprised to learn that vehicles like it rarely appeared outside private collections or museums. What once looked like decay now looked deliberate, dignified. Value changed perception. The homeowner continued his routine, unaffected by the shift. He did not boast. He did not explain. He allowed the facts to speak for themselves. What the HOA still did not realize was that the consequences extended beyond embarrassment. Their actions had triggered contractual clauses buried deep within the original development agreements. Clauses that activated review processes when management entities exceeded authority. Clauses that exposed liability for harassment, wrongful enforcement, and interference with private property rights. The homeowner had not invoked them yet, but they were there. The HOA's legal counsel finally delivered what the board had avoided hearing. They were vulnerable, not just over the car, but over years of unchecked behavior. The car incident had created a paper trail, one that could unravel far more than a single dispute. The association faced a choice. They could acknowledge limits, revise enforcement practices, and quietly settle the matter. Or they could continue pushing, risking exposure that would not end with them. The tension reached the neighborhood itself. Residents who had once relied on the HOA to handle everything now questioned its legitimacy. Some wondered whether dues had been collected under false assumptions. Others questioned past fines, past liens, past enforcement actions. Trust eroded quickly. The homeowner watched it unfold with calm detachment. He had not set out to dismantle the HOA. He had only wanted to park his car in peace. But power, once challenged, rarely collapses neatly. It fractures, revealing weaknesses long ignored. The board scheduled an emergency meeting, closed to residents, hoping to decide their next move before control slipped further. They underestimated how little control they had left. Because the story was no longer contained within meeting rooms or email threads, it had escaped into public records, neighbor conversations, and quiet realizations that authority is only as real as the truth supporting it. The HOA had built its power on assumptions. The homeowner had built his position on facts, and facts, once revealed, could not be taken back. The HOA's walls of confidence had cracked, but cracks spread faster than anyone could repair. Once unshakable, the board now operated under a cloud of uncertainty, each member aware that one misstep could invite consequences they had never imagined. Emails became hesitant, internal memos cautious, and meetings were held behind closed doors with legal counsel hovering over every decision. The illusion of control had vanished, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that they had underestimated a resident whose calm exterior masked an unassailable position of authority. The car, still resting quietly in the driveway, had become a symbol. To outsiders, it looked ordinary, weathered, unremarkable, perhaps even neglected. To anyone who understood, it was priceless, an artifact of automotive history worth millions. Its presence reminded the HOA daily of the misjudgment that had brought them to this precarious state. It was not just a vehicle anymore, it was leverage, and the homeowner understood that leverage better than anyone. The board's first instinct was to seek compromise. They began sending tentative emails suggesting mutual understanding and future cooperation, hoping to regain some semblance of control. Their language was polite, almost apologetic, carefully avoiding any reference to authority. This attempt to regain credibility was transparent, and neighbors noticed the shift in tone. A rumor spread quietly that the board had miscalculated. Some residents wondered if the homeowner was involved in litigation or had access to resources that could challenge the HOA legally. Meanwhile, the homeowner's influence extended subtly but decisively. He began to document his communications meticulously. Every HOA notice, every email exchange, every internal memo was organized and catalogued. He had already prepared for eventual escalation, and his foresight meant the board's attempts at compromise would do little to slow the momentum he had created. Where the HOA hoped to restore control, they only provided more evidence of their missteps. As the days passed, the homeowner took further steps to solidify his position. He commissioned a formal appraisal of the surrounding properties, revealing the legal and financial intricacies of the street. Roads, easements, and common areas were highlighted in professional diagrams, showing precisely where HOA jurisdiction ended and private authority began. Every inch of pavement, every curb, every section of the landscaped lawns was accounted for. The clarity of these documents left little room for the HOA to maneuver. Residents began noticing changes too. Casual walks along the street revealed subtle markers that indicated property boundaries and easements they had never questioned. It became clear that their assumptions about who owned what were flawed. Some homeowners, previously supportive of the HOA, grew wary, wondering if their dues had been misallocated or if the board had overstepped its authority in past disputes. The confidence that once defined the neighborhood began to dissolve. The board attempted one last strategic maneuver, a meeting designed to intimidate. They sent formal invitations, carefully worded to suggest that enforcement would continue unless compliance was immediate. They hoped to provoke fear, a tool they had wielded successfully for years. The homeowner, however, remained calm. His response was precise, factual, and unyielding, outlining legal precedents, property rights, and insurance appraisals. He did not threaten, he clarified, and each clarification further weakened the board's standing. Tension reached a peak when the HOA attempted a minor inspection of the driveway. Members arrived early, clipboards in hand, intending to document alleged violations. The homeowner greeted them with quiet courtesy and directed them to the records they had requested. As the board leafed through deeds, plats, and appraisals, the room's energy shifted from assertiveness to disbelief. Authority, once taken for granted, crumbled under the weight of undeniable documentation. Even the car itself played a silent role in this transformation. Its understated presence contrasted sharply with the chaotic reaction of the board. Where the HOA had seen rust and neglect, the homeowner's careful records revealed a treasure. Its history, provenance, and appraised value elevated it from an object of derision to a testament of knowledge, foresight, and quiet dominance. The board had underestimated both the car and its owner. By now, whispers of the unfolding situation had traveled beyond the block. Neighbors began discussing the implications of the homeowner's claims and documentation. Speculation turned to admiration, and the once dismissed car became a topic of conversation. Where fear had once dominated, curiosity and respect now emerged. Some residents even questioned whether the HOA had any real authority left, given the extensive legal protections outlined by the homeowner. For the homeowner, this was precisely the outcome he anticipated. He had never sought confrontation for its own sake, nor had he pursued revenge. His goal had been simple: to assert his rights and ensure that authority rested where it rightfully belonged. The car was a catalyst, but the true lesson extended far beyond a single vehicle. It was a reminder that assumptions of power, when left unexamined, can lead to monumental miscalculations. As the HOA retreated into internal deliberations, the homeowner began considering the next steps. He had the documents, the legal foundation, and the historical context to secure his position completely. The board's indecision provided him with time to plan a final, decisive move. That move would not rely on aggression or spectacle. It would rely on evidence, clarity, and an unassailable demonstration of ownership. The street itself, once controlled by perception and fear, was quietly shifting. Each resident now had the opportunity to reassess what authority meant, who held it, and how easily it could be misinterpreted. The homeowner's quiet but methodical actions had changed the neighborhood dynamic irrevocably. The car remained parked in the driveway, unchanged, a silent witness to the unraveling of assumptions and the careful assertion of true control. The board understood belatedly that this was no longer a matter of aesthetics or minor enforcement. They faced a challenge they had never anticipated, navigating a neighborhood where their authority was questioned and their decisions scrutinized. Every step forward now required caution, foresight, and acknowledgement of a resident whose patience and preparation had outmatched years of presumed dominance. And the homeowner, patient as ever, continued to watch. By now, the HOA's confidence had eroded completely, replaced with a cautious, almost fearful deference. Their once bold emails were carefully worded, their meetings shortened, and their internal discussions punctuated by legal hesitations. The neighborhood had shifted from a landscape of rigid authority to a tension-filled environment where every assumption was questioned. They could no longer act as if they were untouchable, and every decision now carried potential consequences that could expose years of overreach. The homeowner had solidified his position quietly but decisively. While the board scrambled to regain control, he prepared his next move. It was not impulsive or vindictive. It was meticulous, deliberate, and backed by irrefutable evidence. Every document he had compiled, the deeds, easement agreements, historical plats, insurance appraisals, and vehicle valuations, was organized in a sequence designed to leave no room for dispute. He knew timing was critical. Public perception could sway quickly, and the HOA's remaining credibility was fragile. Neighbors were now active participants in the unfolding drama, though many did not realize it. Conversations in driveways, at bus stops, and along jogging paths centered around the car, the homeowner, and the board's repeated missteps. What had once been whispered speculation had transformed into communal awareness. The HOA's authority was not absolute. Some residents, previously loyal to the board, now quietly questioned whether their dues had been spent responsibly, whether fines had been imposed unjustly, and whether the rules they had followed unquestioningly for years were being enforced inconsistently. The car, still parked in its driveway, became more than just a vehicle. Its presence symbolized transparency, history, and the homeowner's quiet assertion of rights. Where the board had seen a rusted relic, neighbors began recognizing a carefully preserved piece of automotive history. The homeowner's patience and preparation turned the object of derision into a focal point of respect. It became a lesson in perception. Value is often hidden beneath appearances, and authority that relies solely on assumption is fragile. As the HOA's internal panic deepened, the homeowner moved strategically. He sent a detailed notice to the board, accompanied by a comprehensive dossier of documentation. The tone was calm and measured, yet every paragraph reinforced the HOA's limitations. Legal boundaries were clarified, enforcement restrictions outlined, and potential liabilities highlighted. The homeowner had created a scenario in which every possible board action, whether fines, towing, or public threats, would now expose them to significant legal risk. The board received the submission with disbelief. They had underestimated the homeowner's knowledge and the meticulous nature of his preparation. The documents did not leave room for misinterpretation. They clearly demonstrated that the street, the roads, and even significant portions of the properties were under private arrangements that limited the HOA's reach. Even the car, a subject of earlier derision, was shown to be an invaluable asset whose historical value demanded protection, not condemnation. Faced with this reality, the board began to fracture. Some members urged compliance and quiet resolution, recognizing that the homeowner's claims were legally sound and that resistance could be disastrous. Others, still clinging to the illusion of control, debated limited enforcement, unaware that each attempt would further expose their overreach. Internal meetings became tense, punctuated by hesitation and argument. The HOA's carefully constructed image of authority was unraveling. The homeowner, however, did not act aggressively. He allowed the facts to speak for themselves. He maintained his daily routines, left the car in place, and continued monitoring the situation quietly. Every move by the HOA, every hesitant email or internal argument reinforced his position. He had built a fortress of evidence and timing, and each HOA misstep only strengthened it. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had begun to recognize the shift in power. Residents who had once adhered strictly to HOA rules started to question their legitimacy. Some quietly celebrated the homeowner's restraint and preparation, seeing in him a protector of fairness and legality. Others expressed relief that the arbitrary enforcement of fines and aesthetic rules was being challenged. Slowly, the perception of the street as a place governed solely by HOA authority transformed into a more nuanced understanding. True control rested with knowledge, preparation, and legal clarity. Finally, the moment for public revelation arrived. The homeowner orchestrated a formal review during a neighborhood meeting, one that would ensure transparency and clarity. Every document, every appraisal, and every historical record was presented systematically. The car, the driveway, the streets, and even portions of the surrounding properties were carefully outlined, leaving no room for ambiguity. Residents listened, absorbed the facts, and began to grasp the depth of the HOA's overreach. Board members could no longer maintain the facade of authority. They were forced to acknowledge the limitations imposed by historical agreements and property rights. Their attempts to enforce rules against the car, and by extension the homeowner, were revealed to be unauthorized and potentially legally actionable. The shift in perception was immediate. The HOA's image of control collapsed, replaced by a community-wide recognition of rightful authority and the homeowner's meticulous preparation. The car, once mocked and dismissed, stood as a symbol of patience, strategy, and quiet dominance. The homeowner had achieved what few residents could imagine. He had turned an object of ridicule into a tool of empowerment, exposing assumptions, protecting rights, and asserting control with precision and foresight. The board's confidence was gone, replaced by hesitancy, fear, and recognition of limits they had never respected. By the end of the chapter, the homeowner's influence was unmistakable. The car remained parked where it always had, but its significance had changed. It was no longer a simple vehicle. It was evidence, leverage, and a reminder that authority built on assumptions can crumble under the weight of truth. The neighborhood, once dominated by the HOA's perceived control, now faced a new reality. Power could not be claimed without foundation, and knowledge was stronger than fear. The final chapter of the neighborhood drama unfolded not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with undeniable clarity. By now, the HOA had been reduced to a cautious, fractured entity, its members hesitant to make even routine decisions without consulting legal counsel. The very foundations of their perceived authority had been exposed as assumptions, vulnerable to scrutiny and irrelevant where historical property rights and private agreements held sway. The homeowner, patient and methodical, had transformed a simple dispute over a car into a lesson on power, preparation, and perception. The neighborhood watched quietly as the homeowner took the next steps. Every document had been reviewed, every appraisal verified, every legal avenue accounted for. He formally informed the HOA that all previous attempts to enforce rules against his property, including fines, notices, and potential towing, were unauthorized. He outlined the historical agreements that defined his authority over the street, the easements that protected his rights, and the legal risks the HOA faced should they continue any enforcement actions. The language was precise, respectful, and unambiguous. Authority was not claimed with intimidation, it was asserted through facts. The board members met in emergency sessions, their attempts to strategize further undermined by the homeowner's thorough preparation. Every option they considered carried risk. Any attempt to enforce the rules would expose them to legal liability, while retreating publicly could humiliate the association. They were trapped by their own assumptions. the same assumptions that had made them confident when they first labeled the car a rust bucket. Every misstep from this point forward could be costly, both financially and reputationally. Meanwhile, the car itself had become a local landmark. Where it had once been a symbol of derision and neglect, it now represented knowledge, foresight, and calculated restraint. Neighbors began to see it as more than a vehicle. It was a testament to patience and quiet authority. Conversations shifted. Residents who had previously feared or ridiculed the homeowner now admired his strategic approach. They recognized that compliance does not equal control, and that true power often resides beneath the surface, invisible until it is revealed with precision. The HOA, now fully aware of its limitations, attempted one last maneuver, a symbolic acknowledgement of the homeowner's rights, framed as a gesture of cooperation. But it was too late. The homeowner's meticulous preparation had already shifted the balance of power irreversibly. The association could no longer issue threats, fines, or demands without exposing itself to scrutiny. The block itself, streets, driveways, and surrounding easements, was under his control, legally documented and unmistakably clear. As the dust settled, the neighborhood entered a new reality. The HOA remained, but its influence had been reduced to managing cosmetic appearances and communal amenities, far from the authority it had assumed over decades. Residents learned to approach rules with caution, understanding that compliance must always be grounded in legal authority rather than assumption. The homeowner had demonstrated that knowledge and preparation outweighed intimidation and tradition. The car, unmoved, became a quiet monument to the entire episode. It represented a turning point, a lesson that authority without foundation is fragile, and that patience and foresight can overcome arrogance and unchecked power. Its value was no longer just monetary, it was symbolic. A rusted exterior hid a $2 million treasure, much like the street itself, where assumptions had hidden true ownership for decades. The homeowner continued life as before, undisturbed and composed. He did not celebrate publicly, nor did he boast. The lessons were clear to those who observed. One does not need to fight with noise or aggression to assert control. Facts, preparation, and timing are far more powerful than threats. The HOA, humbled and cautious, operated under this new reality, and the residents learned to see the distinction between perceived power and actual authority. By the end of the ordeal, the street had changed forever. The homeowner's calm but decisive actions had shifted the balance of power, redefined respect, and turned a minor dispute over a car into a broader lesson about knowledge, ownership, and strategic patience. The block was still quiet, the lawns still manicured, and the mailboxes still aligned, but underneath it all, the true hierarchy had been revealed. The man with the car, once mocked, once underestimated, was now quietly in command. And the car remained where it always had, unshaken and undefeated, a symbol of patience, foresight, and the subtle but unassailable strength of truth. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.